Hi everyone, welcome to the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. I'm GoLocal News Editor Kate Nagel. Thanks for tuning in this Friday afternoon to join us as we kick off the weekend. And as we usually do, welcome former state representative, former Deputy Secretary of State, now heads up Stages of Freedom, Ray Rickman, to give his big view.
So, I keep thinking, one day I'll not have to talk about race or racism or sexism or any of those things, that we as a nation will come to our senses and it will be abnormal. I wrote a letter to the governor of Virginia over the weekend and proofread it and showed it to 5 people and put it in the mail yesterday morning. And I said, "Dear Governor, I've heard you talk about racial matters, the negative ones, and you and the Ku Klux Klan and blackface, and you haven't been able to handle it very well. My guess is you're struggling. But don't take it as if you're special, because I think the nation's struggling. The trouble is we don't struggle hard enough." And then I gave him a half dozen suggestions on things he might do, since he promised the next 3.5 years that he's going to move Virginia forward. And I asked him if I might come and visit. I'm going to get a trip out of Williamsburg to it. I'm going to go visit him, and then I'm going to go on to Williamsburg. But I'd really like to sit and talk to him. Now, the truth is, I'd like to sit and talk to our governor as well, governor of Rhode Island. The reason I'd like to talk to our governor as well is because we get confused. We think that we're so much better than Virginia. And we also do things that may not be racially intended. For instance, raising beach fees is not a good idea in a society where most people not going to private beaches don't have a lot of money to pay extra for parking or anything else. And sometimes we, who have more than others, don't think this out. For instance, I know a place the governor could get $16 million quickly, easily. Only 5 or 6 people will lose their jobs, and not a one of them needs to lose their job. They could send them over to URI as janitors, because that's who works there. I'm talking about the nuclear facility outside of the University of Rhode Island's gates. Are you with me? $16 million for a nuclear facility that produces nothing of any value. The budget has 10 things in it like that. Come to $120 million. So I was at Bryant University the other day. I've mounted a one-man show. It's called The Civil Rights Kid, and it's me in the 1960s being beaten in Mississippi and the like. I was thrilled to put this together in the last 3 months and thrilled to go to Bryant University and talk, present, get people's attention, and remind them of the foundation we're standing on with the governor of Virginia. Racist society. At Stages of Freedom, we've mounted an exhibit to show artifacts from the 40s, 50s, and 60s. You know, the salt and pepper shakers on the table, as racist items as you can imagine. And half the nation grew up with this on their table, and Coontown restaurants in Alabama we went to. Can you believe it? In my lifetime as a child, being confronted, having this in my face all the time, as the governor of Virginia did. Does it affect your thinking? Come to Stages of Freedom in the next month and take a look at the 30 items Ana Muniz collects. She has thousands of these items. That's the America in which I grew up.
Hi everyone, welcome back to the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. I'm GoLocal News Editor Kate Nagel. Thanks for tuning in this Friday afternoon and welcoming back after a long hiatus, Robert
That's right.
Whitcomb.
Nice to see you.
GoLocal columnist back from sunnier locales.
Well, they had their work release from the Lewisburg Federal Penitentiary, so this is part of my, my training and vocational. They'd get back into civilian life.
The word was on the street. You might have been south of the Mason-Dixon line for a short while.
I was doing research of facelifts in Palm Beach, Florida. And I also looked into Burmese pythons, which are taking over the peninsula, and apparently they're very tasty. And in Southeast Asia, they're considered a delicacy. The only problem is they have incredible amounts of mercury.
Wait,
so I was going to push that for a food source, a protein source.
Burmese pythons where?
In Florida.
Where have they come from?
Well, they originally escaped from pet shop. Now they're eating everything. Deer, they're wiping out species. This is a true story,
as you
actually.
said,
No joking.
Are people eating them?
In Southeast Asia, they eat them. The trouble is they have incredible amounts of mercury. So I thought that would be a great way to get rid of them, use them for meat, kill them for meat, but apparently the mercury, you'll turn into like one of those old-fashioned thermometers. Very dangerous. Brain damage and, yeah.
You might glow a little.
Yeah.
But let's talk a little bit, because you were down in the lovely Sunshine State of Florida.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the proposal this week put forth by the Raimondo administration to increase beach fees at the state's beaches, just a scant few years after the General Assembly had heralded the cutting of beach fees.
Which I opposed at the time. I'm very contrarian to that because they don't have enough money coming in to support these places. And I also looked into what are the beach fees in Connecticut, Massachusetts. They're higher. So is it regressive? Yes. And I think GoLocal has been very good at talking to a wide range of experts, and a very wide range of opinions from Gary Sass said, okay, they are regressive because rich people go to their private beaches, right? And their private parks and their private estates. Having said that, it's still not very much. $40 for a year, for a season.
Let's talk a little bit. We had the opportunity to catch up with Len Ladaro, URI economist.
Great
As he
guy,
pointed
great
out,
guy.
He said, I want it in writing that this
I put that in my column. You see, ignore what I just said. Will this be scooped up and go into general revenue? I want it in writing, and I want it by statute. And I think Len is talking about that, right? Because this is what happens. All the stuff tends to go back into general revenue.
Well, as we know, the 911 fees, as we see, get scooped up all the time, too. Right. I think that seems to be the general consensus.
In a recession, we'll probably have one next year. So,
nobody argues that the beaches need to be upkept.
And they're a mess, and they don't pick up the trash. Of course, Rhode Islanders are slobs, too. They just throw stuff on the beach.
So it was good. You have to read the comments from Len Ladaro if you didn't have the opportunity.
Now Len's right on the money on that. I think Len would probably support it if he knew for sure the money was going to go to maintenance.
That's what he said. Right. That was literally what his quote
was.
By
the way, apparently a big increase is actually camping fees, which I don't know that much about. And a lot of Rhode Islanders go to these, not just Rhode Islanders, but Rhode Islanders, particularly low-income people, but it's a way of getting out, connecting to nature. They pitch tents, so the big relative increase is really the camping fees, in my mind. I think that's more of an issue, even though I think, when you think about it, the beaches are what make Rhode Island famous.
Well, he also pointed out, and you'll love this too, obviously the law of unintended consequences. If there is, in fact, kind of a significant downturn, and folks really say, well, how many times are we going to go to the beach this year?
Right.
Could the state not be getting the revenue that it anticipated? If people say, you know what?
It's possible. I'm hoping to steal from Connecticut, New York, and even Massachusetts.
Steal people or steal money?
Money.
Both?
Well, money, yeah. I'm not interested in people as people. It's the money they'll bring in. If they would just kind of give the money directly to us, that would be fine without showing up at all. But I want to see a lot of Connecticut plates. And New York City plates.
More Connecticut plates.
Because they pay a higher rate, as you know. They pay a higher rate, and that's found money.
Okay.
But again, we get to the issue that Len raised. What will happen to that money?
Where is it going? And especially, as he said, as that economy has a downturn, it's very tempting if it goes to the general fund, it goes elsewhere.
We'll have a test next year. I think if we're going to have I think we'll probably have a recession next year.
We'll keep an eye on it. Let's see.
I hope I'm wrong, by the way.
Speaking of plagues, earlier this week, the Rhode Island DOT rolled out their autonomous vehicle pilot program.
That was scary.
When are you going to get in an autonomous vehicle, Bob?
Well, I might, the little one, the sort of the glorified van service in Providence, I think I'd take that because it couldn't go too fast. I don't want to get on one on Route 95. We'll end up like that 8-car crash today in Attleboro. I just don't trust that. I think if it's sort of going slowly, you've got a pretty good chance of survival. You might have a concussion, a broken leg, but you probably won't be killed.
But do you think that this is where things are going? Like, will we kind of test it out in the city? If it works, maybe start going?
Absolutely. I think you're going to see
maybe down Route 4 a little bit faster, Route 95 a little faster.
Yeah, and then, right. And, I mean, at least they can't get drunk, so far as we know. You know, a lot of people have that substance abuse. My view of cars the last 30 years, cars are much better than they used to be. They're safer. They've got all these gaps, but the drivers are much worse.
That is
so
true.
You got this problem.
So keep an eye out for those.
I would try it. I will write about it for GoLocal for my first trip. If I survive, I'll have to write the story in the Rhode Island Hospital emergency room, probably.
That would be the story.
Right.
We'd write the story about Bob writing the story.
I'm sitting there, you know, with traction and right. Anyway.
Let's get local here in the city of Providence, as GoLocal had unveiled last week. The police department was still monitoring convicted pedophile Richard Gardner.
Yeah,
since
to the
he
tune
was
of $150,000 so far, something like that.
So they had originally had 2
Why
detectives.
don't they get him a room at the Biltmore?
It would cost less.
I know.
Well, it was interesting.
Room service.
That brings up some other informants and other.
That's right. School tours.
But it was interesting because you had so many different constituencies. Those who question his freedom now that he's out. Is he being targeted? A brick was thrown through the window right after they pulled right after they pulled the coverage, and then the neighbors who said they want the coverage, and then the taxpayers saying, "What are we paying money for?" So who?
I don't know what you
wins?
do. Put him on arm. I assume he's got a bracelet. One of those bracelets on. To say where he is. And I don't know. The central problem with pedophilia is apparently one of the most difficult pathologies to treat.
You can't.
Psychiatrists say, other than chemical or other castration, very difficult to treat, and it's driven psychiatrists and social workers up a wall for years. It's tougher to treat than insider trading or murder or whatever. They don't exactly know why. I know they do a lot of research on this. I think up in Boston at McLean's, but they almost always do it again.
Recidivism.
Yeah, recidivism. Including when they're quite old. I mean, that's what's really scary.
Well, we'll see what happens moving forward. They said they have they're doing like an enhanced monitoring, so not dedicated personnel to it, but they're, I guess.
I wonder how real estate agents are dealing with that neighborhood now and trying to buy and sell stuff.
Well, because we talk about this all the time with real estate. You move someplace and there's train tracks across the street.
Yeah, right.
Can you really complain about the noise? The train tracks were there.
They held up the expansion of the airport for decades. The airport's been there since 1920.
But if you've moved
it's loud. There are planes flying overhead. It's called an airport.
But if you've moved into a neighborhood and he has his right when he's out of jail to move someplace, but do you think it'll have an impact on home values?
Yes, for a while anyway.
And
for a
as
while.
a
How old is he?
homeowner-
Do you remember how old he is?
I think he's in his 50s.
Yeah. Oh boy.
Yeah.
It's a real problem.
We'll see about that moving
I don't
forward.
imagine he's probably going to find some difficulty in getting somebody to share his apartment with or get his house with too. Could be a problem.
Well, he's got a house. He lives, I believe, with his fiance. We'll keep an eye on that moving forward. Speaking of moving forward, later in the show, we're going to have Dr. Terry Rohrig from the Naval War College talk about next week's summit between President Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un in
his
Vietnam.
favorite mass murderer.
So there's a lot of speculation about this upcoming summit. A lot of folks are saying, is the president really angling for that Nobel Peace Prize? Does he value peace or the appearance of peace with the leader of North Korea more than denuclearization itself? I mean, this is a fine balance. Yeah,
because they ain't going to denuclearize. Everybody knows that. They want a deal in which the U.S. pulls its troops out of South Korea, and then they blackmail, threaten South Korea to being taken over by North Korea. I'm simplifying a bit. That's basically it. Pull the U.S. umbrella from over South Korea, and then gradually put pressure to take over the whole thing.
So you're not optimistic about this?
Not at all. Not whatever. I mean, with Kim, it's kind of like Trump. Everything he says is a lie, including and the. Yeah. So, no, I'm not optimistic, but we could have some momentarily good news. The stock market might go up, but I just don't think there's any substance. There'll be rhetoric.
We'll see. You'll have to see what the professor says when we
I
talk
always
with him.
prefer rhetoric to reality anyway, so we should be happy.
Live in la la land.
Yeah,
okay,
right.
let's talk about rhetoric.
Okay.
Let's talk about the last kind of one of the biggest pieces of news this week, the Jussie Smollett situation.
Oh, a riot. Yeah, great. But as the police chief in Chicago said, it's terrible because the people who have real complaints, now they'll be discounted. Too many cases because this narcissist. I never quite believed the story anyway. It was too neat.
Well, initially,
why would he do that? He was already famous.
Apparently, there's speculation he was looking for more pay. Again, there's still a lot of speculation at this point. But initially, after the incident had happened, he refused to turn his phone over to the police, which I believe was a little bit of a flag.
That didn't raise the confidence level a little, yeah.
So, a lot of national attention, a lot of man hours paid from the Chicago police. But if anything, might there be a silver lining of don't try to perpetrate a bogus crime?
I hope it's discourage people, but it may encourage some people too,
Copycats?
To try, hey, I can do it. I'm smart. I won't have it on my cell phone. The things that these people do are just amazing. The stuff that people have on their cell phones, and the cops get it, and they're surprised that they're off to the ACI or something.
Well, we'll see what happens with that.
By the way, I saw him being interviewed briefly. I've never seen that show, so I'm totally, whether he's good or bad, I have no idea.
You just don't know.
He's certainly imaginative.
What do we have in the column this weekend?
Well, I talked about Jim Gillis down at the Newport Daily News, which is now part of kind of the pro-Joe Gatehouse empire. He had a funny column saying that Larry Ellis, a very rich guy, just brought a fourth estate, should pay for a new high school, which I thought was an entertaining idea. Instead of another art museum, catering to the rich.
Let's get a little more pragmatic.
Yeah, $120 million. It's kind of hard to tell with Mr. Gillis meant this as a gag or whether he's serious, but certainly Larry Ellison, fifth richest person in the world, or at least in the country. Certainly, this would be like you and I going out and having a cup of these.
Maybe a martini or two.
Maybe a martini.
I could donate, but that's pretty much okay.
So I talk about that. I talk about the new tech hub going on in Newport, which Newport would gradually become the capital of Silicon Coast, which goes from New Bedford, the electric boat thing, all the way over to Woodsall.
The new Silicon Coast.
Yeah, marine technology.
I like
and
it.
Newport in the middle.
Okay.
Yeah, with better restaurants than the other places.
What else we got going on?
Okay, what else do we have? Globochar, whatever her name is, the Minnesota stuff. She's quite right. She's fending off demands for instant Medicare for all. You're all talking about Medicare for all. She suggests the public option. Remember the public option in the first debate about Obamacare? You sort of gradually bring it in. It's sort of along the lines of like lowering the Medicare age to 55. That's the way to go. You can't do this overnight. And when people are saying, tomorrow morning at 5:15 a.m. it's Medicare for all, she's being much more reasonable about that. She's also against a free 4-year college, which would be bankrupting. She's trying to position herself, at least by current Democratic Party standard, is sort of a moderate. Her biggest problem may be that she's apparently a terrifying boss.
I think she's owned up to it.
They hate her. Yeah, she screams at them. She humiliates them. Now, maybe this is what we need. It worked for Stalin.
Well, you're going to have to read more of Bob Whitcomb this weekend on GoLocalProv.com. Glad we could get you back in studio. The extended hiatus
See you
was
soon.
too long.
It's pretty frightening. Stay away from Burmese pythons. Too much mercury.
Don't go anywhere. We're going to be right back with our next guest here in the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. Hi everyone, welcome back to the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. I'm GoLocal News Editor Kate Nagel. Thanks for tuning in for the noontime show. Would like to thank Bob Whitcomb and Ray Rickman for coming on, and would also like to thank my next guest, Wendy Fashion. Thank you for coming back today.
Thank you, Kate, for having me back.
I appreciate your coming back and talking about the Jester and Farley Fund, of which you are an ambassador for here in the state. You've got the books, you've got the props.
Yeah.
I'm really going to let you start to tell the story.
Okay.
And let's start it from Neil.
Okay, we'll start from Neil. We lost our son 2 years ago to cancer. But really, his story began with the Jester and Farley Fund a few years before that. When he was in high school, he was part of the student leadership training program. And as part of that program, he would bring this book into local schools in East Greenwich. And with associates of his, they do dramatic presentations of the Jester story. This was Neil's Farley piece. He would play Farley and do silly voices for Farley. And then what they would do is, after they present to the kids would put on a readathon to raise money for the Jester and Farley Fund. So the kids would get paid, say, a penny a page, and they'd raise that money, send it to the Jester and Farley Fund, and that became books that were donated to kids in hospitals, kids fighting pediatric cancer, kids with other challenges as well. So the book and the doll, these are the Jester and Farley Fund. They've, start a little bit with the author, David Salzman. Okay, he was a student at Yale University, an artist and English major, and his senior year he was diagnosed with Hodgkin's. Then he managed to write and illustrate this beautiful story about the Jester, and he passed away at age 23. 5 years later, his mother and father made sure this was published. They mortgaged their house to publish the book, and then once it was published, they had 10,000 copies that they sent to children all across the country in hospitals. A really incredible story. This was before Neil was even born.
Right before. It was actually,
right,
I saw he was born just after the book was published.
Just after the book was published, like the year after.
And then when he got his own diagnosis, he turned to the book.
Well, actually, 2.5 weeks after Neil was diagnosed, a package arrived at our door. This is the book, this is the doll. So Neil actually had his own book and doll when he was diagnosed. And it's just, there's so many parallels between Neil's life and David's life and the Jester's story in the book. It's a wonderful story about just resilience and positivity and character, and it's just, I don't know, I could go on and on about what a wonderful story is. I could tell you a little bit about it, but I really think that it's something people have to discover for themselves. It's just such a beautiful gift.
And speaking of discovering for themselves, you've been bringing this to students into schools. I've been seeing all the pictures this week with all the young students and taking part and reading the book and pictures with it. I mean, what's the reaction when you bring it, especially very young folks and especially young people, learning to deal with their emotions and how to react to things, and it must be just so impactful to share the story with them.
It's absolutely. It's very uplifting. I love to present all the pictures. Ask the kids what they love about the story. What resonates with them. It's always different for each child. It's a different page, a different part of the story. Really, really interesting. One of the boys had just lost his grandfather 2 weeks ago when we were doing the story this week, and so we talked about that a little bit, and it brings up those conversations. It's I don't know. It's really, and there's so many other messages in there about being a difference maker, knowing that you can make a difference in other people's lives, and that was Neil's big thing. He was always saying, just never underestimate the power you have to touch someone else's life, and he was all about that. Neil was a jester himself. He was always smiling, always taking care of other people, always making other people laugh, and it's just so wonderful when this book gets in the hands of whether it's a child who's just struggling with family at home in life situations, you know, at-risk kids or whatever. It's a wonderful story for them. But then for the kids that are in the hospital, this, you know, the jester arrives, jingly little jester arrives at their, you know, at the door of the hospital with the book, and it just lights up their life. And I think it's so important, you know, we look at medicine, I think laughter really is the best medicine. I mean, it is actually shown to be an epigenetic factor. You know, our moods, our emotions, and our thought patterns play into how well we can, you know, face a challenge like a disease or anything else. So
I'm just going to bring you a little bit closer over here,
Okay.
Wendy, because I don't want you to scoot away, because there's big news, too, about going now to a bilingual version.
well, actually, they've had the bilingual version, and we gave that to all the kids. That's right behind here.
Let's go here.
If you want to open up just to the middle, anywhere in here, really randomly, you can kind of see how the bilingual, the Spanish is down here, the
fantastic.
English is up here, and it's great for, you know, particularly I work with a lot of kids in after-school programs who are from Spanish-speaking families. But the kids can read English because they're learning to in school, but the parents can't read English, but the parents can read Spanish. So this is a book that they can share all together as a family, which I think is just fabulous. And I just heard yesterday that they're in the process, actually at press now, is a book that's going to be Japanese and English.
Fantastic.
5,000 books are being printed right now. So it's just, the Jester just keeps expanding, and new things are constantly happening with the organization. So it's really exciting to be a part of that. And I am so grateful. And this is how I channel my son spirit, is by sharing this book and sharing the joy.
Now, I hear a little
Yeah.
bit of the jingling. You
Yes.
had come across something that had reminded you of a jingle this week, and you believe it was a sign.
Oh yeah, I wrote about it, but we were on the beach and there were a whole bunch of jingle shells. This was out at Rome Point in North Kingstown, and there were jingle shells all over, but I couldn't remember the name jingle shells. I know them as toenail shells. I'm sure a lot of people have heard that. And I'm like, no, there's another name. It's not toenail shells. And all of a sudden I saw this wiffle ball that looked like it was about this big, and it was tarnished with algae, so it was like a golden color, and it looked just like a giant jingle bell. And I'm like, oh my gosh, jingle shells! I know. Okay, so it was really pretty funny. I just felt as if Neil was there walking with me. It was his spirit. I just feel it everywhere.
Well, his spirit lives on, as he said, in the jester role. And
Yes.
And wanting to make kids laugh at any stage in life, and especially kids who are facing adversity. And it's the Jester and Farley Fund that promotes the reading and promotes back to the community as well. And we'll, of course, provide links to that, so if folks are watching and said...
And I might add that they have a fun book, a curriculum guide for teachers, and a supplement. So
fantastic.
There's all kinds of
Bring it
great
to the
support
classrooms.
material for the classrooms. Yeah.
Well,
which they've done
a
a great
wonderful
job.
book honoring Neil. And Wendy, I appreciate your coming
you.
in and your work in the community with sharing this wonderful book, again, with more students in the state, across Rhode Island, across the world. The Jester has lost his jingle in now several editions. So, of course, we'll provide links again to the Jester and Farley Fund. So, Wendy Fashion, thank you so much for taking the time to come in.
Thank you
Don't
so
go
much.
anywhere. We're going to be back with our last and final guest here in the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. I'm GoLocal News Editor Kate Nagel. Thanks for tuning in this Friday afternoon. Would like to thank my guests Bob Whitcomb, Ray Rickman, and Wendy Fashion for coming on. And would like to thank a regular, Dr. Terry Rohrig, down at the Naval War College, expert in the Korean Peninsula, ahead of the summit next week between President Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un. Dr. Rohrig, thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure. Glad to be back.
Well, always love to pick your brain about the more salient issues to keep an eye on when these two end up meeting. Now, next week in Vietnam, lots of talk about what this meeting will entail, of course, as they talk about denuclearization in North Korea, and as well as it plays into the broader peninsula as well. What can we expect to see next week?
Well, I think there are things that you can expect and things that you may hope to see. I think on the latter list, in regards to what we hope to see, I think two key pieces in my view. First of all, there has to be a very formal statement that indicates there is agreement on what the simple word denuclearization means. There have been differences in regards to that. Does that mean North Korea denuclearizes? North Korea is believed to perhaps have a more expansive definition of what that means, that it may entail some removal of U.S. troops on the peninsula, perhaps an alteration to the alliance, other sorts of things that go with that. And so a common definition of what denuclearization means is going to be important, despite the fact that Kim has said that he agrees with that goal, but it has not been fully framed the same by both sides. The second piece that's going to be very important is a specific timeline of some sort that shows a detailed plan to reach denuclearization. One of the criticisms that came out of the Singapore summit last June was that there was no specific timeline. Now, I think in some respects you have to be careful about that assessment because that meeting came a little more quickly than typically happens. There wasn't much time for lower level officials to negotiate the details before the leaders met. But this time there has been much more opportunity for various officials to meet, talk about the details, try to come up with a more formalized plan. And so that's going to be the interesting part to this, in my view, to see what kind of plan emerges from this. Because if it's just a matter of vague statements and not much concrete, I think the general assessment will be that this meeting was a disappointment.
Is this meeting, in some ways, as you allude to, having to put the teeth to what that original meeting had been? Of course, it was so heralded that, of course, the two leaders had met at that previous one. Could you say that this one is, in fact, more important because this is where the rubber meets the road?
I think in many respects that is the case. Certainly the first meeting was groundbreaking, just simply that it happened. I mean, a year prior to that, who would have ever thought we'd even see those kinds of pictures? And so even from the standpoint of these meetings and the process reducing tensions on the Korean Peninsula, I think that is an important development and is good progress in regards to this. I remain skeptical that we can reach denuclearization, but I think it is something that we have to try. I think it is important that this process continues to go forward. But as you suggest, the first meeting was important simply because it happened and for some other elements to that. But now it is where we have to start getting down to details and start to see whether the denuclearization process can actually move forward.
And so let's talk a little as well. There's some speculation, of course, behind the president's motivations moving towards this meeting, perhaps keeping an eye on the dangling carrot of a Nobel Peace Prize. But then there's also ones that say, perhaps, as you said, if there's not, again, that real backbone to the outcome of this meeting, you know, does President Trump really want denuclearization, or do you think he favors just keeping the peace with North Korea more?
Well, I think the president would definitely like denuclearization. I think that has been clear from the administration, from South Korea, from others, that is the ultimate goal. Now, the question, of course, is whether realistically you can achieve that. Interestingly, this week, the president has backed away a bit from that, in particular, his references to phrasing this as the ultimate goal, and also talking about it in the context of he's in no hurry to have this happen. That certainly is no surprise and suggests that this timeline is much longer than at least was initially suggested by certainly Kim and as well as the Trump administration. But it makes one wonder the degree to which the administration understands that this may be certainly a long process, one that we may never get to, but we shall see. But I think the key piece here is that the president is very invested in this. This is his baby now. And so I think he is going to work very hard to try to see if this can be advanced. Now, from the other side of the coin, I think from Kim's perspective, it is very important that the result of this meeting begin to show, or at least suggest, that there remains some momentum as a part of these talks and this process, that it does not come out of all of this that there is an end and this is over and done and we cannot move forward. I think Kim will be very crafty, very clever in trying to make sure that this meeting continues to appear to be part of a process that may still have momentum, that may still have a chance to go forward, because I think this is part of North Korea's overall plan to see that this can continue to be a process that has a life that continues beyond February.
And let's talk a little bit outside the confines of the U.S.-North Korean relations. Let's talk about the theater in general in relations between North and South Korea and also other Asian countries as well, for instance, China. How does this fit into that bigger sphere over there, Terry?
I think China is absolutely delighted to see this process going forward. They certainly were not happy with all of the testing North Korea did, particularly in 2017. They applied sanctions and, from what we can tell, actually enforced them vigorously this time, and that sort of economic pressure had a degree of influence over North Korea's behavior. But the Chinese have also been regularly saying that in addition to that pressure, there has to come dialogue to try to lower tension levels and to try to arrive at some sort of a diplomatic solution to this problem. And so I think they are very happy to see where this goes. I think the Chinese would absolutely like to see denuclearization happen on the Korean Peninsula. But for them, stability is much more of an important goal on the Korean Peninsula, and are happy to see this dialogue go forward.
Any other aspects of next week's summit in Vietnam, Professor, that we should be keeping an eye on over here?
I think two things that are very important. First, many have been criticizing the United States that it's time for the U.S. to agree to more concessions. It will be interesting to see what the United States is willing to offer in regards to concessions, particularly sanctions relief. That has been one of the key pieces that North Korea has called for. But of course, critics of this process have said the danger here is North Korea will simply pocket whatever concessions the United States is willing to do. We end up never getting to denuclearization. And so the key is that North Korea has to show some degree of willingness up front to move towards denuclearization.
Okay.
So I think the key piece is going to be to see what concessions the United States is willing to offer. And then on the flip side, what assurances North Korea is willing to offer that will actually be able to move us in that direction. I think one other key element that is going to be part of the table is going to be whether we have movement towards a peace declaration, which is something a little less formal than a peace treaty, but it is moving away from the current armistice negotiations, or the current armistice agreement that we have, to some sort of peace declaration and or peace treaty. Then one last part to this that I think is interesting to keep an eye on, and this was certainly part of the Singapore agreement, and process was there was the formal meeting between Kim and President Trump. Then there was the press conference that occurred after the meeting where the president surprised folks and put on the table the possibility of suspending exercises and also the notion of withdrawing U.S. troops from the Korean Peninsula. But he followed up by saying, well, but that wasn't really on the table. There is always certainly an interesting element of seeing what sort of ad hoc parts to this process could come about in regards to the overall meetings, as well as the formal gatherings between Kim and President Trump.
Well, as always, appreciate getting to pick your expert brain on what to look for as Kim Jong-un and President Donald Trump are meeting again next week in Vietnam. So, Professor, thank you so much for taking the time to Skype in today. We certainly appreciate it.
Happy to do that, and I realize I forgot to mention that these views are mine only and do not represent the U.S. government or the Navy.
Okay, we have the official disclaimer. With that, we'll let Dr. Terry Vohrig down at the Naval War College sign out. And with that, that just about wraps up another week here in downtown Providence. We look forward to seeing you next week on Monday when it's Business Monday with CEO Josh Fenton. But of course, read the big news right now on GoLocal Prov. Bob Kraft facing prostitution charges. So go to golocalprov.com, check us out over the weekend on Facebook, and we'll see you next week. I'm GoLocal News editor Kate Nagel.